cliffs of Isla Vista. They've been referred to as beautiful, majestic, breathtaking. There's another word that's very appropriate given recent incidents. That word is dangerous.
Hi everyone, my name is Henry Soria. I'm a 35-year resident of Isla Vista. That's a heck of a long time living in our little beachside community. But truthfully, I wouldn't have it any other way. It's the place I've called home since 1987 and continue to call home and will continue to call home, and I hope that this becomes your home as well. This is a place where people come to start their lives at a very young age. Be they UCSB students or Santa Barbara Community College students, or just to come to the area for work. This is where a lot of people start their lives. In that 35-year tenure, I've seen a lot of things happen and a lot of changes occur. But the one thing that remains a sad physical constant is the issue of cliff falls from the cliffs here in Isla Vista. It's a constant topic of discussion with the Isla Vista Recreation and Parks District, the Isla Vista Community Services District, Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors, law enforcement, and emergency medical responder personnel. Since 2010, we have had, to my count, and I could be wrong, 20 cliff falls. Some of those have resulted in fatality. A lot of those have resulted in life-changing injuries. And to the victims of those that passed on the cliffs, my deepest, sincerest, and most heartfelt condolences on the loss of a loved one. It's never easy to accept that. I wish there were words that could bring them back, but there aren't. My hope for this video is to create a sense of empowerment among our community, young and old alike, student, resident, whatever. A sense of empowerment to take control of yourself, to prevent yourself and others from approaching the edge of those cliffs. If you see somebody on a Friday or Saturday night at a party getting ready to jump the fences to be on the cliff's edge, stop them. And don't do it yourself. It's not where you want to be. It's not where you need to be. Nothing good comes of it. I'm not going to lie, this video is going to get boring at times. We will discuss the mechanics of a fall. We will discuss the physics of a fall, along with the inherent dangers along the cliffs that lead to falls. What's done in an attempt to prevent people from approaching those cliffs, the methods that are in place. We'll also cover a lot of other topics on this matter. This video comes with two sources of inspiration. One is my good friend, who happens to be a director of the Isla Vista Community Services District, Carrie Topliff. She recently came up with a poster addressing cliff falls, and I will feature that poster near the end of this video. The other source of motivation, inspiration for this video, is my friend Sierra Marquis Winkler. She's no longer among us. She was one of the many victims of those cliffs back in 2014. She was 20 years old. She would have been 29, 30 years old this year. Young enough to be my daughter. This is her in this picture. She was a kind, loving, caring soul, and she's dearly missed. And to her family and friends, again, my deepest, sincerest, and most heartfelt condolences on the loss of Sierra. Like I said, we will cover a lot of topics in this video, but my hopes are that it creates that sense of empowerment I was talking about, to keep people away from the edge of those cliffs. My hope is to change the attitudes towards the topography and topology known as the cliffs of Isla Vista, with the hopes of keeping people safe and preventing future needless deaths or injuries. We've had enough deaths. We've had enough injuries. We're done. We're over it. We need to change the attitude, and I hope this video does just that. So, without further ado, I thank you very much for your time. to watch, the time you're taking to watch this video. And here we go. Thank you.
Altitude or height is the main physical hazard that the cliffs of Isla Vista are known for, but the mechanisms that lead to cliff falls start at the top of the cliffs. We all know about cliff erosion as a result of climate change. It's been a commonly spoken topic in many of the community meetings and forums, and while it is a potential contributor, it is not the main contributor to cliff falls in Isla Vista. In terms of physical hazards, the biggest contributors to cliff falls in Isla Vista have more to do with what's on the top of the cliffs, and these include shale rock, downward pointing cliff edges, ice plant, moisture, and darkness. These hazards form a deadly combination and can lead to a horrible chain of events. The way these hazards work together is very simple. Ice plant is a slippery, succulent plant that grows abundantly along Isla Vista's bluff tops. It has a very weak root structure, and the shallow roots actually cause the cliff tops to crumble. When you step on a bed of ice plant, there's a huge possibility that you will slip. If the surface you're stepping on is on a downward slope, then that slip will turn into a slide. Add moisture on the ice plant from the fog, and the sliding potential increases more. Darkness due to poor lighting along the Isla Vista cliffs also make for a higher probability of sliding due to misjudging the ground underneath your feet. When a person slips on ice plant and falls, the underlying surface made of shale rock then crumbles and the ground underneath gives way, thus leading to a cliff fall incident. If the erosion on the cliff below is due to the undercutting of the cliff face, the ensuing fall is of the uninterrupted nature as there's no obstructions to hit on the way down. This usually ends in fatality. Should the erosion of the cliff be from the top down, then this could lead to an interrupted type of fall as there's some cliff on the bottom protruding, thus forming hit points on the way down. This type of fall can be non-fatal, but this will depend on the nature, extent, and severity of the injuries incurred during the fall. Once a chain of events at the top of the cliff begin to occur, the fall is then initiated, and the following series of events is irreversible and in some cases fatal. So let's talk about the kind of falls that occur from the cliffs here in Isla Vista. Emergency responder personnel have to deal with injuries that are consistent with one of two types of falls, these falls being uninterrupted and interrupted. Let's start with the interrupted kind of fall to explain what that is. So when a cliff erodes from the top down, there's a big debris buildup along the bottom. This usually consists of rocks, mud, debris that falls from the cliff top. So when a victim falls from a cliff and they hit this obstruction, it's basically what we refer to as crags or hit points. And every time they hit, their body gains more instability until they go into a mode we call ragdoll, which is not good. The injuries consistent with this kind of fall that paramedics see are concussions, contusions, lacerations, whiplash, and fractures. Now, I will say that with the interrupted kind of fall, a lot of those don't end up being fatal, but they do produce life-changing injuries. Now, then there's the uninterrupted kind of fall, and this is what happens when you have undercut erosion from the bottom up, and the cliffs are overhanging, and when a cliff collapses and the person falls, it's a free fall from top to bottom. And these are usually the most fatal kind of falls that there are from the cliffs here. Now, there is a way that a interrupted kind of fall can turn fatal, and that is a function of the tide. If the tide is up against the cliffs and a fall victim gets to the bottom and they go unconscious and there's water down there, they can drown in 6 inches of water. Another thing that happens too is hypothermia. In all reality, a lot of these falls happen at nighttime, and the victim goes unattended until the next morning. Hypothermia can set in and be a cause of death. That's not a great thing to come across walking on the beach early in the morning as a deceased person at the bottom of the cliffs. I wouldn't want to. I mean, that's pretty traumatic. But those are the results of the two different kinds of falls. The interrupted kind of fall, in a lot of cases, it's not fatal. In some cases, it is, but you do get life-changing injuries. With the uninterrupted kind of fall, it's usually always fatal.
you don't want to do either one. Stay away from the cliffs. I can't say that enough. Just don't get near the cliffs. Don't jump the fences. Don't get near the cliff edges. These things, they happen. And when they do, it's traumatic for everyone, for the families, for the friends, everyone, for our community in general. But just wanted to share that type of description about the type of falls that occur. And, well, that's that on that topic. So in skydiving, we have a very morbid saying, and it goes like this: it's not the fall that kills you, it's the sudden stop. And as morbid as that saying sounds, it's been proven to be true and accurate by the laws of physics as they stand. So we're going to take a look at what happens when a fall occurs from the cliffs. We're going to look at the physics behind it, and we're going to quantify the effects in terms of numbers. The type of fall we'll be looking at is what I refer to as the uninterrupted fall, which is straight from top to bottom, which is essentially a free fall, same as with skydiving. So please bear with me on the following boring physics, but I feel that this is a way that we can quantify what happens as a function of a cliff fall. So here we go.
So we will be using some standard units for these calculations, and these will rely on variables such as height, which will be measured in feet. For mass, which is the weight of the object falling, we'll be using pounds. For duration of fall, which is the time from top to bottom, we'll be using seconds. For velocity, we'll be using feet per second, which we will convert to miles per hour. And for acceleration, we will use feet per second squared. The unit used to determine the amount of energy expended upon impact is kinetic energy, and that's measured in joules. And as you can see, the formula for that is 1/2 mv squared. And then there's the amount of force expended upon impact, which is measured in newtons, and that will be calculated with the equation of F equals ma. So our variables, there will be mass, which is a constant actually. It's going to be 100 pounds. The height, that will be the true variable, and we're going to use heights ranging from 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50 feet. And these heights are all consistent with the varied heights of the cliffs here in Isla Vista. So let's start at 5 feet. The duration of fall is 0.6 seconds. The velocity attained is 18 feet per second, which when converted to miles per hour, it is 12 miles per hour upon impact, and the kinetic energy release would be 678 joules. This will be our starting point. Now we go to 10 feet, 5 feet more than before. The duration of fall goes to 0.8 seconds. The velocity increases to 25 feet per second, and the conversion to miles per hour is 17 miles per hour upon impact. Now the kinetic energy, it goes up a bit, and that's 1,466 joules. So what happens at a height of 20 feet? Now the duration of fall is increased to 1.1 seconds. The velocity is 36 feet per second, and upon impact, you're hitting 25 miles per hour. The kinetic energy released at this point would be 2,712 joules. I have to point out that once you get over 15 miles an hour, that's a significant amount of impact velocity. So now we're up to 25. So let's go up to 30 feet. And now you see that the duration of fall has increased to 1.4 seconds. And the velocity is 44 feet per second, which amounts to 30 miles per hour upon impact. And the kinetic energy release would be 4,068 joules. So 40 feet of height. Now the time or the duration of fall has increased to 1.6 seconds. The velocity is 51 feet per second, which is 35 miles per hour upon impact. And the kinetic energy is 5,422 joules. Finally, at 50 feet, which would be the maximum height in terms of the cliffs here in IV. And now you can see that the duration of fall is 1.8 seconds. And I have to point something out here. That's a long time to be falling. If you do survive a fall, you're going to remember that 1.8 seconds for the rest of your life. The velocity attained here would be 57 feet per second, and converted to miles per hour, you're looking at 39 miles per hour upon impact. And at this point, the kinetic energy release is 6,779 joules. That's a lot of energy. So on an average, the acceleration attained during a cliff fall, regardless of whether it's 5 to 50 feet, it comes out to an average of 32 feet per second squared. And the average force upon impact, again, regardless of height, from 5 to 50 feet, is 445 newtons.
So you can see from these numbers that we've calculated that as the altitude increases, the effects are more pronounced. But honestly, a lot of harm can start to occur at 10 feet from a 10-foot drop. I know it doesn't sound like a lot of altitude or height, but yeah, you fall from 10 feet, you're going to feel it. Again, I have to point out that once you start getting to 30 to 50 feet, the duration of fall is definitely increased, and that's just a period in time that if you survive, that experience will haunt you for the rest of your life. Unfortunately, from those heights, a lot of people don't survive. The forces of impact are very severe. The injuries as a result of that are very severe. And I can't stress enough that the best survival against a cliff fall is just to stay away from those cliffs. That's something I just cannot stress enough throughout this video. So please just stay away from them. It's not worth it. It's not worth it to you, your friends, or your family, or parents. It's not, there's never a good outcome from falling from these cliffs. And I can't express that enough.
So the patios and balconies on the bluff tops along Del Playa, those things have been a topic of discussion in many community meetings and forums. And let's face it, they are definitely in a dilapidated state or condition. This is due to the erosion that's been occurring over time. The erosion that we're talking about is anywhere from 32 to 36 inches a year. It could probably be more this year with the winter storms that we've been having. In fact, we just had a patio collapse a few weeks ago during one of the heavy storms. The good thing is there was no loss of human life or no injuries, and I credit this to the proactive approach that the management companies have been taking to put barrier fencing to prevent people from reaching those dangerous edges. With that said, given the amount of erosion that occurs and that it is a constantly occurring effect, those patios and balconies are always going to be eroding farther and farther in, and that means that the proactive approach is going to have to continue, and fencing will have to be moved farther and farther away every time. So this is something that it's a reality we have to face. The management companies have to face, but so far from what I've seen in all the fencing, it is in place and it is keeping people away from those edges. Now it just comes down to people not going over those fences, and that's always the hard part.
So thus far we've discussed a lot of issues regarding cliff falls in Isla Vista, these being the physical hazards such as ice plant, downward facing slopes, crumbling shale rock, and we've also discussed the patios and balconies, how the erosion is affecting those. thus posing a physical hazard. We discussed the types of fall, interrupted and uninterrupted, as well as the physics of falling. The one thing we haven't discussed yet is, what do we do to mitigate these hazards? How do we keep people away from these hazards? And the answer to that is simply fencing. There's plenty of fencing in Isla Vista, actually. The picture you're about to see is a satellite view of the coastal area of Isla Vista, and the fencing, you'll see it's indicated in red, and the yellow arrows, those are actually beach access to the beach from Isla Vista, those being at El Embarcadero, Camino Pescadero Park, Camino Corto, and the access between Vatapel and Sea Lookout Park, all along Del Playa there. Those are the only fence breaks there are, but check out this picture.
So as you can see, that's a heck of a lot of fencing. And from the picture, as you can tell, it begins east of Manzanita Village, in the area we call Depressions, and continues westward all the way to the end of Sea Lookout Park on the 6800 block of Del Playa. Now, if we were to make it a continuous line of fencing, which means ignoring the breaks for beach access, you would have an approximate total length of 4,873 feet, which is approximately 0.9 miles of fencing along Del Playa. And the approximate property breakdown of this fencing shows that UCSB has 982 feet, that's behind Manzanita Village. The Isla Vista Recreation Parks District, with all their parks on the bluff tops along Del Playa, they have about 750 feet. And the rest belongs to private apartment properties, and that amounts to 3,140 feet. So as you can see from these video clips, that there's fencing, but there's also another thing in place, and that is signage. Fencing is what's referred to as an engineering control. It's a system in place that is mechanical, structural, however you want to look at it, and its purpose is to physically prevent people from breaching that barrier and encroaching onto a hazardous cliff edge. The signs are what's referred to as an administrative control, and those are basically a warning as to what could possibly happen if you breach and encroach upon the cliff edge. And all these controls, administrative or engineering, they are well within the requirements set forth by Santa Barbara County. So coupled together, these controls that are in place, the intention is to both warn people of the hazards and dangers of the cliffs and to prevent any encroachment onto the cliffs by humans. So one of the things that has to be noticed from these video clips is that the height of the fencing is not consistent along Del Playa. Some sections of fencing are only about 3 feet high. Other sections of fencing are a little over 4 foot high. But regardless, it's a fence. And there are signs in place to tell you, don't go past this fence. It's dangerous. It can kill you. Also, there's different types of fencing along the way. You have anything from the chain link fences, which is a traditional fence, and you have like wooden, what I refer to as ranch style fencing. But regardless, again, it's a fence. Another thing that's in place as a barrier is shrubbery, flora. It definitely does help to have that between the fence and people. That kind of keeps people from encroaching onto the fence and then encroaching onto the cliffs. So one thing that's noticeable is a lack of consistency in the fencing, but this could be as a function of the constant occurring erosion. So what happens when erosion occurs and it goes past the fence line towards where people are? Well, one classic example of what's being done is here in the clips by Isla Vista Recreation Parks District, is they put up the orange caution netting or fencing, And this should be indicative enough to say to people, hey, we've got a breach of erosion here. It's breaching the fence. Don't get near this. It's dangerous. You don't want to be here. Management companies do the same thing too, and it behooves everybody to do this, because if they didn't, it would be a legal liability, and you don't want that. So that's definitely a must. You got to do this. Now, it has to be pointed out that west of Sea Lookout Park, as you're seeing here in this clip, that's open cliff, no fencing on it. Same thing for east of Manzanita Village or Depressions. That's unfenced cliff. It goes all the way to Campus Point. And again, no fencing there. So one of the things that becomes pretty apparent, given the nature of cliff falls that have occurred here in Isla Vista, are the measures in place doing the job that they're supposed to be doing? So we're going to look along these fences and find out if these barriers are being encroached upon or trespassed upon to create encroachment onto the areas that have the physical hazards we've discussed before. So here we are near Depressions behind Manzanita Village, and it's all the fencing here. So let's take a look. A little ways down here, hard while I get my balance on my bike here. And so far right now, the plants in place seem to offer that buffer that you need to keep people from encroaching onto the cliff edges. There's some spots that are open, but there's no encroachment. Then, as you get a little farther down, you see this. And this is a spot where the cliff edge has been encroached upon. And look at those fissures right there. That's cliff edge ready to collapse and fall down below. So let's take a look a little farther down and see again. And as we approach over here, let's see if we have another encroachment spot. There's one that was sealed off. Here's another. People have definitely jumped the fence here to hang out on the edge of this on this cliff here. So this is another spot where the area was breached and the cliff was encroached upon. You can see there's been some definite cliff collapse here. But yeah, this is again over by Manzanita Village at the far west end, where it starts to abut to the apartment complexes on Isla Vista. So as you can see from the clips, those last few clips there, you notice two things. One of the first things you notice, that very last clip, you'll see there's the basis for fence poles, and you see the cliff around those is gone, which indicates that at one time there was a fence there. The erosion was on the other side of the fence, but the erosion breached the fence line, and they had to put a new fence line in to keep people away from that eroded area. The other thing, sadly enough, is we see points in the fence where people are jumping the fence and going onto that dangerous edge of these cliffs. Now, one of the things that always comes into discussion or into play in these discussions about cliff falls is erosion caused by climate change. This is not a debate about climate change at all. There are facts. Those facts are that we have 32 to 36 inches a year of erosion from these cliffs. So that fence line is going to be a constantly changing boundary. Also, what's done once the erosion breaches that fence line, and now people are exposed to that erosion, that potential danger? So we're going to take a look at some clips
Recently, we just had another series of bad storms, winter storms here, and it eroded some of the cliffs. Definitely caused some damage. But we're going to see in these clips coming up how this is proactively dealt with. We know that now people are exposed to this, so what do you do? And these clips will show that.
So this is at Pelican Park on Del Playa on the 6500 block. And as you can see on the bottom of the fence, there's a lot of soil missing from erosion. You can even see fissures across the flat surface there. So what Isla Vista Recreation Parks District does, once they spot any of this erosion that's breached the fence line, they put up the orange emergency netting fence, and this is sufficient to keep people back, warn them that, hey, there's an erosion risk here, don't go past this. Then the next step is to have Marboard come in and put in the emergency fence panels, like you see here. Once this is done, then they assess, if the features such as those benches there need to be moved back, and then a permanent fence is put in place. It's a never-ending process given the amount of erosion that happens and the ever-changing faces of those cliffs. Here's Sea Lookout Park on the west end of IV, and look at the amount of erosion there. That fence is gone. That is completely gone. And again, you can see the orange safety netting fence, and there's signage too telling people to stay away as well. So then Marboard will then come in and they will put the emergency fence panels up. This will mark out where a new fence will go, and once again the features that are there, such as those benches, they have to be moved back to accept a new fence line. And again, I can't stress that this is a never-ending process. These cliffs erode every year. That fence line is going to be a constantly moving boundary. The thing is to stay on top of it. Constant vigilance. That's the key to assure people's safety.
So here we are on some of the most western end of Isla Vista. A spot called Jail House. It's been my favorite surf spot for 35 years. And one thing I have to point out about these cliffs here is that they're unfenced. There's no fencing around them. And the amount of cliff falls in this area has been not many to any of at all, to my memory. And at one time there might have been one or two couple cliff falls, but I can't recall any of recent in this area. And that's, you have to take into consideration, this area is unfenced. There was one incident in last year in 2022 where an individual decided to drive a car off those cliffs right over there. He was joyriding in the nature preserve area up at the top and decided to make a quick exit and thought there was a path down or a road down to the beach. The car ended up going over the cliffs, and fortunately no one was injured or killed. Made a mess. They had to have cranes tow it out, stuff. But other than that, not much else. Same thing with Lagoon Island, completely unfenced. Lots of erosion, but not many cliff falls, if any at all there. And Campus Point, there's been 2 cliff fall incidents in recent times. The most recent being November of 2020. But that incident is of a suspicious nature. It's still under investigation by a private firm. But other than that, not much else. So there's something to be said for these areas that are unfenced, but we don't have as many incidents. So something to think about going forward in this video.
So this is Lagoon Island behind UCSB, and as you can see, lots of erosion. And here comes Campus Point. Lots of erosion too, no fencing whatsoever, but only a couple of falls from those cliffs there, well, Campus Point. So this is a recent little jaunt I took up the trail on the west end of Isla Vista. This is just west of Sea Lookout Park on the cliffs there. And yes, I'm on a bicycle riding with one hand and holding the camera in the other. And it's pretty precarious out there. This is after a rain. You can see puddles. And here I am heading straight towards the cliff edge on my bike and making a sharp right turn. Again, one hand on the handlebars, one on the camera, to show the inherent danger of these cliffs. No fencing, lots of erosion. You can see tree roots, things like that. But and this is behind residential housing, as well as there's a little park there that's run by Isla Vista Recreation Parks District. But again, no instances of people falling off these cliffs. So now we're entering the nature preserve that's on the way to Devereaux. And once again, no fencing along the cliffs here. You can see benches right up to the cliffs. You see erosion along the cliffs. You see the inherent physical hazards of ice plant, downward facing slopes. There's plenty of shale rock there, but there are no fences in place. Interesting thing about this area is that there's always a lot of people out here. A lot of people use it for hiking, nature watching, bird watching. It's the commuter route to down to, like I said, to go surf down at Devereaux or Jailhouse or Sands Beach. Doesn't matter. There's a lot of people out here, but the thing is, there's no fencing. There's a bench there right along the cliff there. No fencing whatsoever. The hazards are in place, but the number of cliff falls in this area are, like I've said before, 0 to not many at all, if any at all. So that it pretty much amounts to 0. A lot of ways a person can go off the cliff here. This is the area too where the joyrider and the nature preserve decided to take his car down to the beach the hard way. And like I mentioned earlier, luckily no one was injured or killed in that. A lot of things could have seriously gone wrong, but luckily they didn't, aside from an environmental mess. Here we are now. We're almost approaching the surf spot that I call Jailhouse. That'll be to our left. But we're seeing, and there's a tree line here that works as a bit of a barrier, but still no fencing. A few clearings. There's clearings that take you right up to the edge of the cliff to go look over the cliffs and watch the sunset. There's a bench right there. Again, you can see lots of erosion taking effect. Jailhouse is just to the left of that date palm tree right there. Now we're on the way to Devereaux. And there's an existing tree line. You can see to my left here. And that does serve as a natural barrier. There is some fencing behind some of these trees. So there has been fencing put in, but it's very sparse, very time-worn. It's kind of falling apart. But again, no actual man-made barrier or installed barrier in place along the way here. More clearing. You can see that trail goes right up. You can see a little bit of a fence there. So a fence post and some chain link. Now we're approaching Devereaux, and the cliff house will be to the right. Devereaux Reef will be to the left here. Last big clearing, a bench right there. So now, as you can see, there's some fencing here, and that's that ranch style wooden fencing along the cliffs. And as we round the corner down here at Devereaux Point, turn right, and that'll be the cliff house. That's pretty much it.
So thus far, we've looked at a lot of different aspects about the cliff falls here in Isla Vista. Those being the physical hazards in place, the physics behind the fall, the type of falls, the fencing in place, the signage in place, what happens when erosion breaches the fence line. The one thing we haven't looked at is where specifically are these falls occurring. So this next set of clips here will show the locations where most of the cliff falls do occur. And this is where we begin to kind of shed some light on the issue of these incidents here in Isla Vista. So check this out.
So the best way to understand cliff falls in Isla Vista is maybe to look at the satellite view map of Isla Vista, such as this obtained from Google Maps, and we can see the general Isla Vista area as well as the outlying areas of Devereux to the west, Manzanita Village behind UCSB to the east, as well as Lagoon Island and Campus Point. So this is the area that we normally consider our home, where we all live, go to school, go to work at, basically Isla Vista. So now we're going to break it down into the actual areas of IV. And as you can see again to the west, you got Devereux, and then to the east, Manzanita Village, Campus Point, which also includes Lagoon Island. Then we also have it broken down to the different blocks in Isla Vista, and that's the 6500, 6600, 6700, and 6800 blocks. So this is the general breakdown right here of what we call our community. Now this map, what we're seeing is fencing and unfenced areas as well. The green line indicates where fencing is on the bluff tops. As you can see, it extends from depressions behind Manzanita Village all the way west to the 6800 block of Del Playa, and it ends at the west end of Sea Lookout Park. The areas that are unfenced are Lagoon Island and Campus Point and Devereux. There is some fencing at the end of Devereux by Coal Oil Point, but as you can see, that's quite a lot of fencing. It's the 0.9 miles that we discussed earlier, but that's a lot of open bluff top that's unfenced. Another thing to point out is the erosion is constant or consistent from all the way from Campus Point all the way to Coal Oil Point. So there's no change in the physical hazards or no missing physical hazards. They're all there. Everything from the ice plant, the downward facing slopes, the crumbling shale rock, and the erosion. It's all there from point A to point B, whether it's fenced or unfenced. So now we get into the jurisdictional aspect of the map. And what that means is who controls what property. So again, areas that are fenced, they're marked in green. Areas that are unfenced, they're marked in red. So the first jurisdiction we'll talk about is the ones marked in yellow gold, and that's Isla Vista Recreation and Parks District. They also control some of the property for Santa Barbara County parks, and one such park is Walter Capps Park on the 6700 block of Del Playa. The areas marked in the gold yellow, that's Isla Vista Recreation Parks District controlled property. They maintain the fencing and the signage there. The next jurisdiction we'll talk about is UCSB, which is marked in pink, and that extends from the west across Devereux all the way to Coal Oil Point. And on the east, it extends from Manzanita Village all the way out to Campus Point. And as you can see, some of it is fenced, some of it is not. Then we get into the properties or the jurisdictions marked in blue, and that's private property. Those are apartments along Del Playa. And you can see in this clearly that the majority of the apartments are in a fenced area. So there's definitely a lot of fencing there behind a lot of it. Like we said earlier, 0.9 miles of fence from east to west. So it's a lot of fence in place. So breaking it down in terms of percentages, once again, we go to Isla Vista Recreation Parks District / Santa Barbara County jurisdiction, and that's 750 feet of fencing, which is approximately 15.39%. Then you have UCSB with 982 feet of fencing, which is approximately 20.16%. And then you've got private property, which is 3,140 feet, which amounts to 64.45%. And that's how it's broken down in terms of footage and percentages. So these percentages, they're going to come into play once we start looking at the actual amount of cliff falls and where they occur. So keep these percentages in mind, and we'll go forward with some other interesting views about what's going on with cliff falls here in IV. So this is kind of a dismal map here that we're drawing and we're looking at. And these are the actual numbers of cliff falls that have occurred in Isla Vista. So far since 2001, there have been 34 cliff fall incidents. Now, I must point out that 2 of those are kind of anomalies, those being the most recent one being the car driving off the cliffs over in Devereaux, and the other one being the tragic loss of Jeff Jewell in November of 2020 from Campus Point. Like I've said, that's something that's still under investigation by a private firm. So even taking those 2 into account, looking at all the cliff fall incidents that have occurred since 2001, Campus Point has seen 3 falls, and that's 8.82%. Manzanita Village, or behind there, has seen 1 fall, and that was a fatal fall, and that was that's 2.94% of the falls. Then you get to Devereaux, which saw the incident with the car, and that's 2.94%. But then you get into the 6500 block of Del Playa, and there's 5 falls there. That amounts to 14.71%. Then you get to the 6600 block of Del Playa, 10 falls, and that's 29.41%. Then you get to the 6700 block of Del Playa, that's 12 falls, and that's 35.29%. Then you get to the 6800 block, and it's only 2 falls at 5.88%. That's quite a lot of falls from the 6500 to the 6700 block of Del Playa. So looking at it on a collective way, in a collective manner, that's a lot of falls from the fenced-in area. Why is this happening? In fact, if we break it down, as you see on the right of the picture, the red being the unfenced areas, that's only 11.76% of the falls. But then you get to the data outlined in green, which is the fenced areas, and you're looking at 88.2% of the falls there. That's almost 90% of the falls that occur in Isla Vista, and those being from the fenced areas, which have plenty of fencing, barrier, and plenty of signage, warning, but that's where the falls seem to be occurring from the most. I want to point something out. I was asked about this data, where it came from, and what I used to get this data was news stories in the following publications, those being the Santa Barbara Independent, the Santa Barbara Ed Hat, Santa Barbara News Hawk, and the UC Santa Barbara Daily Nexus. I went to their archives and dug up all the cliff fall incidents from 2001. I could have gone back farther, but it seems that cliff falls have also increased since 2001. So this is sufficient data on a more recent basis, and that's where it all came from. But going back to where the falls occur, I find it kind of alarming that you're seeing most of the falls occurring where there is fencing rather than where there is no fencing. So maybe we have to look at different factors involving these cliff falls. So looking at the data that we just provided, it's pretty obvious that 88%, let's just say 90 for the sake of evenness, simplicity, 90% of the falls occur from the fenced areas and only 10% occur from the unfenced areas. The thing that doesn't make sense here is the unfenced areas, you have open exposure to the dangers that we've spoken of, the ice plant, the downward facing slopes, the crumbling shale, the erosion, all that stuff. People are exposed to it. There's no barrier, there's no signage, warning of it, nothing. Then you have the fenced areas, which there's a barrier keeping people away from those hazards, and there is plenty of signage telling people about the hazards in place or what can happen if you breach that fence line. So maybe we have to look at more data to understand what's going on, because it's not making sense. You have the area with the protection in place, but you have 90% of the falls occurring here, then you have an unprotected area and only 10% of the falls occur. And 2 of those falls I have to add, of the 4 falls that have occurred in the unfenced area, like I said, one of those is here, Campus Point. That was in November of 2020. That was suspicious circumstances. And then there was a car incident on Devereaux, just up the coast here. And that was completely weird set of circumstances. So let's take a look at the following data and see where we can arrive with it. Well, we've seen before that the majority of the cliff fall incidents happen from the 6,500 to the 6,700 block of Del Playa. And here's a graph that indicates that, just to get away from numbers and look at actual graphical data. And again, I have to point out that from the easternmost end behind Manzanita Village to the end of Sea Lookout Park on the 6,800 block of Del Playa, that's all fenced in. We don't see as many falls behind Manzanita Village. We did see one, and we don't see many falls on the 6,800 block. We've seen two, but you get the 6,500 to 6,700 block, and that's a brunt of the falls right there. And now we're looking at the falls per year on a graphical basis. You can actually see, over time, what's gone on in Isla Vista and with regards to the falls from the cliffs. So you see falls 2001, 2003, 2005, 2009, 2011 through 2014, 2016 through 2022. And there are some periods in between where no falls have occurred. And a trend that becomes apparent to that, as a result of that, is that whenever you have fatal falls, the year after, the number of falls diminish. But there are exceptions to this trend, and I'll explain. There were no fatal falls in 2001, but there was that dry period after that. Then in 2003, we did have fatal falls. And then same thing in 2005 and 2009. And you see that after those years with the fatal falls, you see that period afterwards where there was no falls at all. Then we did have fatalities in 2012, 13, and 14. And in 2015, again, there were no falls. So the fatalities kind of led to an awareness of these cliffs are dangerous. But then you get to 2016 through 2022, and there were fatal falls in 2018. And the falls continued all the way to 2022 when we had another fatal fall. The trend that I think you see, or I see anyway, is that anytime that there's a fatal fall, there is an awareness that people gain about the cliffs, but then it's forgotten shortly thereafter. Another trend that I see alarming is the number of falls from 2011 2014. It's like, a couple falls a year, with 3 of those being fatal, 3 of those years. What led to that flurry? What was the change in area demographics? And then the same thing, 2016 through 2022, you see, falls every year, with 2 of those being fatal. So something occurred in those periods in time, and I'm working on that. I'll have to look at more data, but that's right now, as it stands, that is the timeline of falls from the cliffs here in Isla Vista from 2001 to current. So looking at the months when falls occur, starting with January, you see there's a couple falls in January, then it increases in February, then March there's nothing going on, and then April, wow, just jumps up, and then May and June you have falls, but they start to diminish. And in July there's nothing, and then August, September, October, and November, you see in August you see some falls, and it increases in September and October, and then it comes back down in November, and then December there's nothing. So what this tells me, knowing the school year here in Isla Vista, the UCSB and SBCC, in January is when people start to return for the new for winter quarter, and what you would call spring semester at SBCC. And the parties start up and everything, and people are gathering and stuff. And then February, things get going. Then in March, you have, for UCSB, you have midterms and finals and spring break. Same thing with SBCC. Then everybody returns in April, and the parties start up again. And then Same thing in May. And then in June, you have finals and graduation and everything like that. And then July, there's nobody around because everyone's gone for the summer for the most part, unless people are doing summer quarter. Then in August, people begin to return for UCSB and SBCC. And then in September, things get going full swing. You have all the parties, you have the Greek rush, you have all that stuff going on. Same thing in October. And then you also have Halloween as well. Then November, you've got the midterms and you got finals. And then December, everyone's gone for winter break. The latest development in Isla Vista within years has been Deltopia. And that occurs on the first weekend of April. And that brings a lot of people from out of town to the area. And that could be a reason for that spike in falls that you see in April. As far as the September and October, again, it's because you have all the parties with the Greek rush system and the Greek system rush and Halloween. But it is definitely outweighed by April. All the months are. And that's when you have the biggest influx of out-of-towners. It used to be Halloween, but now Deltopia has become the thing to come to Isla Vista for if you don't live here. So that's when you see a lot of the falls is April. Like I said, you look at March and you look at July, and there's no falls there. So timing is, it definitely plays a big part of the cliff fall incidents, and it's something that has to be looked at. So now we look at the year on a quarterly basis, starting from winter quarter, going to spring quarter, summer quarter, and fall quarter. Winter quarter, you get a couple falls. I think in many cases, those are kind of what I refer to as an anomaly, but they do occur. And there they are, they're listed. And they account for like about 13% of the falls that have occurred since 2001 in that time of year. Then you get the spring quarter, and you have a huge increase. That's quite a lot of falls. You're seeing about 38, 39% of the falls occurring at that time of year, and there are reasons for that. Summer quarter, it drops down, but still significant. And then you have fall quarter, which you see an increase again. So the two big events that occur on a yearly basis, those are Deltopia, which happens in spring quarter, and Halloween, which happens in fall quarter. And those two events draw a lot of people from out of town who aren't aware of the dangers of the cliffs. Another thing about spring quarter, too, that I have to add is the weather gets nicer. Parties happen a lot more often. People are going out, enjoying the area. It's a beautiful time of year. People are returning from spring break. So you definitely see a lot more activity in the area. Now, one of the reasons I have to say that summer quarter doesn't show as many falls, but still shows falls, is because July takes away from cliff fall incidents, as the previous graph showed that there's no falls that have happened in July since 2001. So a big reason for this is that once graduation is over in the middle of June, everybody just leaves town. So you've got the last half of June with no one around, hardly anyone around. And then people start to return in July, either to move in, start their new leases at their new apartment, to either just live in the area, or getting ready to start summer quarter at UCSB or summer semester at SBCC. But they're busy. They're focusing on the attention that needs to be paid to get that done. Move in, go to school. It's still a beautiful time of year, but there's not a lot of people around. There are parties, but they're not huge. Then people start showing up in August, getting ready for fall quarter, and then you have a big increase in parties, a lot of people roaming around, enjoying the area. The weather's still beautiful at that time, so it leads to more people out and about. And then you get to September, and then you have school starts for fall quarter, and you have a huge increase in parties. The Greek system has fall rush. all kinds of stuff. And again, the weather is still nice. Then in October, in fall quarter, the big event that used to draw a lot of people from out of town was Halloween. Last couple of years, not so much. Last year was practically nobody from out of town showed up to go to parties and stuff. But usually, historically, it used to draw a lot of people to the area. And again, when people from out of town show up, they don't have a lot of awareness of the cliffs or familiarity with the area. So that's another factor too that has to be looked at. But that's pretty much the year broken down on a quarterly basis, how it works. And this is from 35 years of observation from what I've seen. Now we look at the days of the week. When do most of the falls occur? And we have to look at, from Monday through Sunday. And as you can see on Monday, it's very small, about 3% of the falls. Then Tuesday you see an increase in falls. Wednesday it drops back down again. Then Thursday starts picking up. Then Friday drops down again. Then Saturday it just spikes upward. And then Sunday it drops down again. But I have to point out that when cliff falls occur, they don't get reported until the next day. So a fall that happened on Friday night might not get reported till Saturday morning. A fall that happened on Saturday night might not get reported until Sunday morning. And a fall that happened on Sunday night might not get reported until Monday morning. Now, if we were to look at it weekdays versus weekends, you're looking at about 42% of the falls occurring during weekdays. Then you're looking at 58% of the falls occurring on the weekends. But we have to take that description that I gave of when falls occur and falls are reported. But it doesn't change the fact that when you get from Friday to Sunday, the number of falls definitely increases. And, that's also when the parties are happening. There's a lot of parties going on. And, well, it's just, it's a great time for it. School's over for the week. Sometimes the partying starts on Thursday night. So it's variable, and it's also depending on the time of year as well. But what we see here in terms of days of the week, weekends definitely have the highest amount of falls. So now we're going to look at a up close and personal set of statistics, and that is the age of the fall victims. And looking at this graph, you can see that the majority of falls occur from the 18 to 22-year-old age group, with the 20-year-old age group having the highest amount, almost 50%. Then there's that 23 to 24-year-old age group where we don't see many falls in that age group, or any falls, in that age group. And then you have 25 where we see a couple falls. In a way, this graph, also correlates with the amount of fatal falls that have happened. And the way it plays out is there's been one fatal fall at the 18-year-old age group. There's been 3 at the 20-year-old age group. There's been 1 at the 21-year-old age group. 2 at the 22-year-old age group, and 2 at the 25-year-old age group. So it kind of correlates. Fatal falls do correlate with the overall number of falls in terms of the age, with respect to age. The thing that I find interesting is that 23, 24-year-old age group where we see no falls at all. So something's going on there. Now, I have to point out that the 2 individuals who did suffer fatality-type falls in the 25-year-old age group, they were from out of town visiting. I believe that one of them was a UCSB graduate, and that was last year in August. He was a UCSB graduate visiting, and he jumped from one patio to another over a fence, and there was nothing on the other side, so he fell straight to his death. But the biggest age group is 18 to 22, and the median age for cliff falls is 20 years old, and the average is 21. So statistically, it definitely shows that that's the most active age group in terms of cliff falls here in Isla Vista. Another set of statistics that we'll discuss here, and I don't have a graph for because it's only 2 components, and that's gender, male and female. And as it currently stands, it's no surprise. Females only have 18.52% of the falls that have occurred off the cliffs in Isla Vista. And males have 81.48% of the falls. So that's no surprise. Males are more prone or more likely to jump a fence to get from one party to the other. And other reasons why they jump a fence, such as urinating off a cliff or something like that, but they have the highest propensity of doing that, the highest potential for doing that. Females, not as much. But as it currently stands, males definitely, it's almost an 82 to 18 ratio on that. So definitely gender does play a role in who falls off these cliffs. I'll look farther into that set of statistics as well. But for the time being, that's what we have on that. Now, I'm going to take the time to discuss fatal falls here and the statistics behind that between male and female. Again, no surprise, the males have the highest amount of fatal falls from the cliffs. Out of 9 fatal falls since 2001, males have 7. That amounts to 77.78%. Females have 2 falls, fatal falls, at 22.22%. So it kind of, the fatal falls do sort of reflect the overall fall statistic of male to female comparison. And doesn't matter if it's fatal or not. You know, falls from these cliffs are never good. And, you know, we got to get to the bottom of this. So why is all this happening?
So, yeah, I know that was a lot of boring statistics to get through, but we have to look at those statistics in order to better understand what's going on here in Isla Vista with regards to cliff falls. I have to point out there was one mistake on one of the statistics, and that was the one about age. And there was one fall that did occur at 23 years old, but it wasn't enough to change the average or median points of age in that graph. So there was one fall that did occur at 23. The 24-year-old age group, no falls there, as you can see in this graph. So upon reading the articles about cliff falls in the 4 different publications I've previously mentioned, those being Santa Barbara Independent, Ed Hat Santa Barbara, Newshawk Santa Barbara, and UCSB Daily Nexus, there are 2 common denominators that become very apparent in these cliff fall incidents. And the first one we'll discuss has to do with eyewitness accounts of what actually happened. I have to point out that these are cliff falls that occurred in the fenced-in areas from behind Manzanita Village all the way to Sea Lookout Park on the 6800 block of Del Playa. And most of the incidents that had an eyewitness account to them, what the eyewitnesses describe is a breaching of the barrier that's in place. And that breaching occurred in one of 2 manners, one being unintentional, where the victim was sitting on the fence and they fell backwards onto the cliff and then off the cliff. The other one being intentional, and that is where the victim of the fall actually intentionally, purposefully breached the barrier by jumping the fence and going onto the cliff edge. And regardless, it led to a cliff fall. But the one that's really disturbing is when someone willingly, intentionally jumps that fence. They ignore the signs in place, which there's plenty of, we know that, and they breach the fence, which there's plenty of, we know that as well. And then they expose themselves to the potential hazards. The potential hazards are there, but they're not coming to us. We're going to them. And like I said, if you do that unintentionally, that's one thing. But willingly, intentionally, that is disturbing. And from eyewitness accounts and a lot of the news stories that I read, sadly enough, the majority of those incidents were intentional, willing breaching of the barrier, which shows that the signage was ignored and so was the barrier itself. And that's a very disturbing common denominator. I don't like this. Everything that's in place is up to code. with respect to what the county calls for in terms of signage and in terms of barrier. And but people are choosing to ignore that, and that's disturbing on a number of different levels. The second common denominator, this is something that's a very touchy issue, and that is the issue of intoxication. And I'm going to show a poster right now that was put together by my friend Carrie Topliff on the Isla Vista Community Services District. She's one of the directors, and she put this poster together. And this is it. So this poster, it's pretty stark. It's very, has a lot of impact to it. I'm not going to call it graphic. There's no graphic imagery to it. But it does point out that there's an issue that involves cliff falls and intoxication. And one of the things that a lot of the news stories about cliff falls also listed was blood alcohol levels. And now we all know that blood alcohol level is determined by what's in the Department of Motor Vehicles handbook, which says the legal limit is 0.08. In fact, if you get pulled over with a 0.08 BAL, you will get what's called a wet reckless, which means you have to go to court and you're going to get a fine and things like that. But if you exceed 0.08, then now you're in a different territory. Some of those reports of blood alcohol level from some of those falls, they were alarming. Some were at 0.16, which is twice the legal limit. Some of those were at 0.24, which is 3 times the legal limit. Some of those were 0.3132, which is about 4 times the legal limit. And one of them was 0.39, which is almost 5 times the legal limit. You know, intoxication, people are going to do it. People are going to drink no matter what. You know, I was in the era where drinking age was 18 years of age. And, you know, people a little bit younger would have a drink of beer or wine or whatever. But now it's gotten to a point of excessive drinking. And one of the most disturbing mottos or credos I ever heard was blackout or back out, which is where you drink to the point of blacking out. And if you can't do that, just don't do it. That's not a good credo to live by for a number of reasons, one of these being cliff falls. But yeah, intoxication is one of the issues at play here. And this is not to paint the victims of falls, cliff falls, in a bad light. It's not to do that. It's to show that what led to the cliff fall. Facts are facts, and those can't be denied. As it stands right now, one leads to the other, and what we're seeing is that, from eyewitness reports, is that people are breaching that fence line. But what leads to someone breaching the fence line? And that would be intoxication. Abstinence from drinking is not a solution. It doesn't work. It just is not a feasible solution. But what is a potentially feasible solution is awareness, accountability, empowerment. And we all have that within us, to be aware, accountable, and empowered. We don't want to see more cliff falls happen. I get kind of emotional about the issue, especially after losing a friend to that. Eventually, sadly enough, another sad statistic that's not published here is eventually all of us here in Isla Vista will have known someone who fell off a cliff. And that's not a good statistic to hold. But again, intoxication does play a huge role.
The first thing that medical personnel do when they bring in a victim of a cliff fall, whether they're alive or dead on arrival, they run blood alcohol level tests, and sadly enough, every one of those victims, with the exception of the incident in November 2020 off of Campus Point, there were signs of alcohol in their systems to excessive points, twice the legal limit. And again, I clearly state that abstinence is not the key, but knowing what can happen in an intoxicated state beforehand could shape your future, somebody else's future. So we've discussed everything there is to discuss about cliff falls, and you know, it's a lot of information that we just covered, a lot of ground, a lot of territory. And the one thing that comes to mind in all of this is, what can we do to prevent cliff falls in the future? What can we do as a community? You know, I kept talking about this awareness, this empowerment, this accountability. How can we enable those things, put them to practice? So I'm going to offer some points here on how to deal with these cliffs going forward, because you know, there's a lot of information that we just covered, and from it I hope that we can glean something out of it to come up with some points. So these are some points going forward that I think might be helpful in preventing cliff falls in the future. So these are just some ideas, but check them out. So intoxication, that's the primary factor, cause of these cliff falls. And let's not kid ourselves. Drinking is going to happen, even underage drinking. And I'm not condoning underage drinking by any means, but I'm saying it's going to happen. We know abstinence doesn't work. We've discussed about this. So when people drink, just, you know, when you all drink, just use a little bit of common sense here. Don't drink to excess. This blackout or backout thing, it's a losing proposition. It's ridiculous. Don't do that. It's just going to ruin your night and your day the next day. It could ruin your life and your health. Be aware of your surroundings. That is something that I say across the board for Isla Vista. You know, just be aware of your surroundings. Know where you're at. Know what you're doing. Be with responsible people that are willing to help you. Having people there that are willing to give you a hand in a tough situation, or, you know, keep you off the cliffs. It's a good thing to have. Don't jump the fences and go onto the cliffs. Don't do that. Stay away from the cliffs. I cannot say this enough. Those cliffs, none of us have any business being on them. They'll end your life, or they'll ruin your life, one or the other. It's not a good thing, so stay away from those things. So if you're sober, keep any intoxicated friends away from the cliffs. That's your responsibility. You owe this to them. You owe this to yourself. You owe this to their families, their parents, their friends. You owe this to yourself. Everybody is looking up to you. If you're sober, just keep people away from the cliffs. Try and talk them away from approaching the cliffs. You know, just use kind words. If you have to shame them, go ahead and shame them. This is a society that relies on public shaming. Use that in a useful way to save a life or prevent life-changing injuries. If you need to physically keep them away from doing it, from getting to the closer cliffs, use physical force. Grab them by the arm, pull them back. And if you need assistance, don't be afraid to contact the Isla Vista Foot Patrol. Call 911 if it's turning into a life-threatening situation. Don't let this person be the next statistic. Don't do that. It's in your hands. There's more. You have more control over the situation than you actually think you have. Use the necessary abilities to get the job done. Keep people away from the cliffs. So it doesn't matter if you're sober or intoxicated. That does not matter. Do not sit or stand on the fences by the cliffs. It's easy to lose your balance even if you're sober. Next thing you know, you fall backwards or forwards onto the cliff. Next thing you know, you're at the bottom of the cliffs and you're either severely injured or you're dead. You don't need this. Your parents don't need this. Your family, your friends. None of us need this. The community doesn't need this. Don't sit or stand on the fences. It's that simple. If you're at a party at an apartment patio on Del Playa, establish what I call the safety space of 3 feet between you and the fence by the cliff. You don't need to get close to that fence. Just stay away from it. Some of those balconies, or I'm sorry, not balconies, but patios, they're a little suspect. So just be aware of that. Establish that safety space between you and that fence line. And try to make sure that your friends adhere to that safety space as well. There's a lot of parties on Del Playa, and we're all there to have fun, but no one needs to go off a cliff. Stay away from that fence. 3 feet is sufficient. Be cognizant of what could be wrong with that patio. It could have problems underneath that you don't know about. Don't risk it. Speaking of damage underneath the patios, if you see erosion that is breaching a fence line, notify the appropriate party about the hazard. If it's one of the IVRPD parks along Del Playa that involves Pelican, Sea Lookout, Walter Capps, Rodapel, any of those parks, if you see any damage, contact the Isla Vista Recreation Parks District at 805-968-2017. You can email them at ivrpd@ivparks.org. If you see this kind of damage behind Manzanita Village, contact either the UCPD at 805-893-3446 or the Community Safety Office at area code 805-893-5293. For apartments, usually got to contact the management company that does the work on that apartment, and they'll take care of it. If you see that erosion, contact the responsible party. This is called being proactive. You owe it to your community. You owe it to your friends. You owe it to whoever is, at a party in Del Playa or at one of the parks. You owe it to them. We all owe it to each other. Let's watch out for each other and be proactive about this kind of thing. So this is for the residents of the apartments on Oceanside Del Playa. If you live at one of those apartments and you're having a party, keep your guests away from the fence near the cliff edge. Like I said, some of those cliffs, they've undercut underneath the patio. If you put enough of a strain load on there, that patio could go. So keep them away from the cliff, from the fence. Keep them away from the cliff edge. If you have to implement a primary barrier to keep people away, do it. You can use some rope, set up, like a sort of a makeshift fence using a rope. You can use some chairs, whatever. Just keep people away from that fence. Do not allow them to sit or stand on the fence. If a guest is behaving in a belligerent manner when you approach them about being near the cliff fence or something like that, eject them from your party. It's your party. You're in control. Take control of the situation. Get them out of there. And if they start getting hostile and if they're posing a dangerous threat, call the Isla Vista Foot Patrol. They're there to help you. They don't want to, look, they're humans too. They don't want to see a dead body at the bottom of the cliffs just as much as any of us do. So call the Foot Patrol if you have to. Don't be afraid to do that. They're there to help you in this matter. They don't want to see that. None of us want to see that. You may just save a life by doing that. So if you lose an item, like a lot of people like to play beer die or whatever, and it goes over the fence or through the fence onto the cliffs, don't go onto the cliff and retrieve it. Don't do that. It's not worth it. You're gonna fall off a cliff over a dice or a ping pong ball that if you're playing beer pong or whatever. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Let it go. Just let it go. Don't put furniture such as chairs or couches on the cliffs on the other side of the fence either. This is dangerous. I mean, now you've got a couple people sitting on there and that cliff could give, and now you've got 2 people going for a ride that they don't want to take. This is not worth it. Don't put chairs or couches out there. It's not worth it. It just isn't worth the effort. It's not worth the outcome. Don't do it. And don't jump fences from patio to patio when you're going to parties. This is, sadly enough, what happened to the one young man that died last year. He was jumping from one patio to another. He thought that there was patio where he was landing. There wasn't. It was a free fall from the top to the bottom. He died. It's not worth it. Don't do it. It's not. It just is not worth it to anyone. Don't do that. So another thing is that you have a lot of balconies on the apartments on Del Playa. Yeah, it's a beautiful view from these balconies. You overlook the ocean. But don't use the balconies to climb onto the roofs or down to the patios. If you're going to go down to the patio from upstairs, use the stairs. Don't use the balcony. Stay off the rooftops too, especially when they face towards the ocean, overlooking the cliffs there. Don't go on those roofs. It's easy to fall off them. It's actually easier to get up than down. Getting down is where most accidents usually happen. So don't go up on these roofs. Don't use the balconies as a throughway to go up or down to a roof or a patio. Also, don't jump off of balconies onto a patio. There could be a lacking structural integrity due to the erosion underneath. That patio could actually break off and fall down to the cliffs below with you on it. So don't do that. Don't jump off the balconies. It's not worth it. And if you see somebody doing it, just stop them from doing it. It doesn't matter if they're sober or intoxicated. Just don't let them do that. It's not a good plan. This is how these accidents can happen, or they do happen. So keep people off the roofs. Don't have them climbing from the balconies to the roof or the patios below. It's not worth it. Stop people from doing it. Don't do it yourself. It's not worth it.
So in that last clip, we covered some very basic guidelines to prevent cliff falls. They're very simple. Stay away from the fences. Don't climb the fences. Don't go over the fences. Don't stand or sit on them. Avoid the areas that have the physical hazards we've spoken of. You don't want to be a part of those physics that we discussed. You don't want to be a part of those statistics that we discussed. I don't want you to be that. Your parents don't want you to be that. Your relatives, your family, your friends. None of us want you to be that. It's not a place any of us want to be. By the way, I have to add, today is Sunday, the 9th, and April 9th. It's the day after Deltopia. And I'm happy to report that there were no cliff falls. But I'm also sad to report that there were 2 balcony falls that led to very serious injuries. I haven't received word on the outcome of those falls yet, but I'm trying to stay aware of the situation. And to those individuals that suffered those falls, I just wish them a speedy recovery. That's all we can really do right now. But going back to those guidelines we discussed, I not only hope that they're guidelines that you follow for yourself, but to share with others. I want those guidelines to promote that accountability, that awareness, that empowerment that I keep talking about throughout this video, to keep yourself and keep others away from that danger that the cliffs pose. It's not where any of us want to be. It's not where any of us need to be. I can't stress that enough. We've had a total of 9 deaths off those cliffs since 2001. That's 9 too many. 1 is 1 too many. It doesn't need to happen. 9 out of 34. That's approximately 30%. Don't need that. We don't need that. It needs to stop. And I hope that this video will help bring a stop to these falls. It's wishful thinking on my part, but I like being positive. With all that said, I thank you very much for watching this video, putting up with the physics, the math, the statistics, and I hope that Isla Vista continues to be the place where you come to start your lives. And afterwards, I wish you very long and prosperous lives, just like mine has been. One of the reasons my life has turned out that way is because I've stayed away from those cliffs, and I hope that you do the same. There's no need to put yourself in that danger. There's no need to put your family or your friends or your parents through any of that grief that comes from a cliff fall. So with everything said, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And like I said, I hope it instills that empowerment, that accountability and awareness in all of you about these cliffs, and that you use that to not only help yourself but help others. We are each other's keepers. If we weren't, what kind of society or community would we be? We're known to help each other here in Isla Vista, and I hope that this video helps all of you. If it saves one life, I'm happy with that. I hope it saves more than one. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I'm going to end it now in the next clip. It is the names of those lives we've lost since 2001 off these cliffs. Keep them in your hearts. Keep them in your thoughts. And again, thank you for the time to watch this video. Have a great rest of your lives here in Isla Vista. Thank you.